Throughout the month of July, CineSamples is running a 50% off sale for their strings, their piano, and some of their choir libraries. So in this video, we're going to check out some of these products and see if they're right for you. Hey everyone, my name is Robert Rodriguez and I'm a media composer. If you're new here, I want to invite you to like this video and subscribe to the channel. My goal is to help brand new composers feel confident in their own music writing process. So if you were to head on over to the CineSamples website, you'll find that they have a sale page. And so for this month of July only, you're going to get 6 products for 50% off. This is going to include 2 of their choir libraries, the Voices of War and the Epic Choirs. Voices of War is typically $200, now down to $99.50. And the Epic Choirs is usually $500 and down to basically $250. The next one is going to be the CinePiano. We're going to take a look at this piano in particular. Usually it's $200, now it's $99.50. CineStrings Solo, usually $400 down to $200. The CineStrings Runs is typically $150 down to $75. The CineStrings Core, they have a Core and Pro. This is specifically the Core, is going to be from $500 down to $250. So in this video, I'm going to show you the CinePiano and Solo CineString samples because those are the 2 libraries that I have. So the first library that we'll talk about is the Solo CineStrings. I already opened up an instance of Contact and I already preloaded some of the samples that we'll go over. You'll find an entire folder in the CineStrings package, and it's typically divided by articulations, legato, and pizzicato for the most part. Then it'll give you some extra patches like Bartok pizz or tremolo. Depending on the instrument itself, you'll get some chamber ensemble patches and some split patches as well. If you don't want articulations as a key switch, you could just do short spiccato, spiccato, staccato, marcato, and so on. And then what I did, this multi-presets patch is something I have done already. I've already preloaded some violin patches. It could be legato articulations, pizzicato, and tremolo, and then save that as a contact multi-instrument. And that's something you can do with a lot of other contact instruments, or even if you have Play or Opus, you can do that as well. So with CineStrings Solo, let's check out the Violin 1. It's already preloaded here, and I just did the articulations patch because that gives us a nice overview of almost everything. It's gonna start off with the Dennis Sands mixer preset, and that's gonna be your full preset mix. And I like to play with that because that gives me a very basic starting point. Since we're on violin, lowest note will be the G. And so that's actually a very nice basic sound. What's going to be great, and this is found throughout a lot of other CineSample products, there are some key switches that you can set accordingly. I actually preset this up the way I wanted. So I like my key switches down at the bottom, or if it's a low instrument, at the very top. And I have it set so legato is standard. So it's a very basic way of playing legato. If I were to then switch to D flat 0 or C sharp 0, depending on how you look at it, that will play espressivo. And a mix between those two is actually a great way to play the legato samples. And then if I were to switch to D, that will give me a short spiccato. I could then switch to D sharp or E flat for a regular spiccato. And then E will give me staccato. So compared to short spiccato and spiccato, it's going to give you a longer sound. You kind of heard if I move a little too quickly, the notes overlap a bit. So that's why you want a mix between the two. And then marcato is going to give you an even longer short sample. So I assign that to F, and that will be marcato. And so you can obviously switch between all 6 of these. And then these green key switches down at the bottom, those are a little bit different than the red switches, because if you hold down the green key switch, you will get different articulations. So I want to switch back to maybe short spiccato, and I'm going to hold down this C sharp. We can hear 2 short spiccatos, but I'm only pressing down once. So what happens is it plays 1 once I press down, and then when I release, it'll play another. So the faster you press is how fast the 2 notes play together. If you want it to be played in 3s, press the D sharp. So it's the same concept as before. We press down once and we hear it. You release, and it waits the amount of time that you pressed and released. You might want to do something like that instead of just writing in 3 separate short MIDI notes, because it's recorded and it sounds a bit more natural than just, let's say, regular spiccato. 3 of them in succession kind of lose the short quality. So holding down, it's specifically recorded and meant to sound like 2 or 3 notes played in succession. And this is something that you get throughout the rest of the solo instruments, but also other CineSamples as well. We're gonna switch on over to a legato sample and hold down the A sharp. Before I hold down A sharp, I'm gonna play just a C. So we heard after a certain amount of time, the sample would kind of stop and start again. And what that is if an actual player were bowing a violin, you would eventually reach the end of the bow and have to go back up. And so you kind of hear the bow change. By holding down that A sharp, or whichever it appears to be, the entire patch is just one long infinite loop, essentially. But the bow change does add a bit more of realism to your music. So that is the articulation patch. You can base it on velocity. So if you have the pedal down and you play anywhere between 80 and 127, you get an espressivo patch. If I were to hold the pedal down and do anywhere between 0 and 80, then I get a standard legato patch. And then pedal up and anywhere between 0 and 20. Then anywhere between 21 and 79. And then 80 to 110. Oh, that was a little bit marcato. It's going to be very difficult to kind of get it exact. You have to play very softly, relatively soft, hard, and then very hard. So obviously between 111 and 127, the hardest you can hit is going to be marcato. And you have an inverted velocity map. You have key switch 1, which includes key switches and velocity. And then it reset my original assignments, but this is key switch 2, which doesn't have any velocity. And then you have a MIDI CC map as well. Or you could just create your own mapping preset. For now, we'll just go back to switch 2 and we will go to the mixer. So like I mentioned before, this is a Dennis Sand, just full basic mix. You can go to dry and close, which is just your close mic. You can go roomy, which is your room mic. And then you have ambient, which is a little bit less room, mainly your surround ambient microphones. So that's a very nice soft sound. You have best legato, so this gives you close and room, a little combination of both. You have your bright, which is room and close. What's nice is that it does include a little bit of EQ, so the more right you go, you get some bright, you get focus and warm, and a little bit of reverb as well. You could turn this off if you want to. And then you have your settings tab, which the legato turned on is kind of just like the natural legato sample. It focuses very much on realism with it turned on. And then your dynamics. Your mod wheel is going to affect that knob there. You typically don't necessarily need to worry about high pass, low pass, delay, distortion with these kinds of instruments, but of course it is great to have access to that if needed. You have your round robin, which is either random or cycle. You could turn on the reset and adjust the knob there. You have your smart start, legato, release, delay, and your short release. And that's all within one patch, one articulations patch. So now that we kind of saw the Violin 1 articulations, it's gonna basically be the same throughout Violin 2, viola, cello, and bass. And so the way I routed this is all within one instance of Contact, but I added 4 other aux tracks to host the remaining instruments. Violin 2 is gonna be preset the way I had it. It's once again gonna just be the full mix, the Dennis Sands mix. The setting is gonna look almost identical to the Violin 1, and the mapping is gonna be pretty much identical to the way I had it because this is the way I like it set up. So this is what the Violin 2 sounds like. It kind of has a brighter, sharper sound, I think, than the Violin 1. We will then move on to viola. Once again, Dennis Sands mix. Mapping is the same. That's a nice, sharp staccato or spiccato sound. Let's just try legato. And once again, you could almost hear the bow changes. That's because I'm not holding down the C sharp, or no, rather the A sharp. And let me just, this is a little confusing. Let me just make sure I'm on the right one. Okay, so everything is adjusted accordingly. C being the bottom note of the viola. All right, and then we move on to cello. C being the bottom note of cello, we move on over to the appropriate track, and so the more you increase the modulation, the harder or more intense the sound of the staccato. So right now we're on D, so let's move it to legato. All right, and so then the final instrument in this little ensemble of solo strings will be the bass. Once again, just the Dennis Sands mix, because that's the way I had it. Settings are very similar, and I preset it so that it's all the way at the top here. So right now it's on staccato, or rather spiccato. And I did include a little pizzicato key switch just for fun. So let's try that out. And let's, of course, try legato. That's a heavy, beautifully rich sound. And that kind of covers everything, for the most part, in the CineSamples Solo Strings library. Of course, pizzicato we didn't get to with like violin, but you do get a crazy amount of extra patches, including the chamber ensemble articulations, which just kind of gives you a full range of the keyboard across all 5 instruments. And so I've now added in the next instrument we'll look at, which is CinePiano. And this is something that I feel like I have not seen a lot of people talk about, but this is my go-to piano in terms of sketching, and also I've used it in a lot of my tracks. But I think that it just has a very wide range for you to choose from, which is why I like this piano so much. That first preset is gonna be your initial piano, kind of just like the preset mix already, the Tim's mix. Then you have classical, then you have cinematic, we'll load that in, and rock studio grand. What I'm going to do is assign each of these their own aux track. So I will clear output section and create an individual channel. Yep, do that. And so now each piano is gonna have its own track to go to. So let's start off with CinePiano. We're gonna be able to customize a lot with this. So like before, it's gonna have your full mix, your close mix, your room, and your surround. You have EQ, so you could turn that on, adjust the highs, the mids, and the lows, and then the reverb, which you can change the space that your piano is in. Under settings, this is going to be a little bit different compared to the strings. I love this setup because you can adjust how intimate you want your piano to sound. So if we are on, just to double check, compared to aggressive. So the aggressive character knob is going to sound much more intense compared to intimate. And even if I press quietly, it's still going to be a bit more aggressive compared to. So somewhere in the middle, natural is going to be where you want it. This is going to enable a fortissimo layer. You get your pedal behavior. So true kind of gives it a more realistic playback. You can kind of hear the pedal lifting back up. You get the velocity curves, so output compared to input. With linear, this is going to typically be your natural. It's going to be a very flat-lined velocity curve. The bias forte is going to give you a bit more of a louder sound, and then bias piano will give you a bit more of a quiet sound. The liveliness is going to be how lively you want your playback to be. Compared to no liveliness. I kind of like to keep it somewhere in the middle there. You have your round robins. I like to keep this somewhere in the middle to kind of give each note a little variation. And this affects how many semitones you're kind of bleeding into. I just lifted up the pedal and we heard that thanks to true pedal behavior. So I like to keep this right in the middle. And then the dynamic range. This can be a little confusing to wrap your head around, but you have your, right now it's on natural. If you were to keep it on low, the dynamic range is going to be low. So even if I hit this softly, it's gonna be pretty loud. Natural will obviously be natural, and then high is the opposite. So I'm gonna hit this quietly and it'll play quietly. Almost inaudible. And then the louder I hit, the more intense it becomes. So I don't necessarily want it to be like I can't hear anything. So natural is where you probably want to start off. So you have a very wide dynamic range. And so that's gonna be your CinePiano. You have a lot that you can work with to make this your own. You of course have your dry and close, which is gonna be your just close microphone. Then you have your roomy mics, which is just the MGM Studio sound. You have ambient. That's your room and surround mic. You have orchestra left. That's the sound as if it was on the left side of the stage, and then orchestra right. So that's just some smart panning there. You have resonant, which is gonna give you close and surround. And then custom lets you just do whatever you want. So perspective is going to change the mic positions based on this fader. So right now it's on close, everything else is turned off. If I were to just, it goes to room, goes to surround. So that's great if you want to kind of change up the sound a little bit. You don't necessarily want to be tweaking faders yourself, but you can kind of move this along and get something in the middle. So that is going to be CinePiano. Next up will be classical. With the remaining three, you're not going to get as much customization with these because these are very preset, pre-assigned sounds. So this is going to be a very typical classic sound. You obviously have a fader here that you can work with. You can adjust the EQ or reverb, but none of the original or other faders are going to be available. The setting you can still work with: intimate versus aggressive, forte versus piano, liveliness, semitones of the round robins, and the dynamic range. Next up is cinematic. So this is going to be that ambient sound, that cinematic sound. So that is much quieter. You can get more aggressive with this, but this is supposed to be ambient and soft, and you can just hear the ringing just constantly, which is gorgeous. I love it. And then next up, the last preset that they have is the Rock Studio Grand. So this is gonna be your rock piano. That's just a punchy, sharp, bright sound coming out. Actually, you have a lot of dynamic range with that. I didn't think you did, but you really do. So intimate, aggressive, all the same knobs and features as the others, but obviously a bit more brighter compared to maybe cinematic. So those are just two of the sample libraries that are offered in this 50% off sale. I am personally a very big fan of CineSamples. I've been using them for 5-6 years now. I found that they do a lot of sales like this. It does seem like they're trying to do a redesign of their products and their website as a whole. And last month they did a big 50% off sale as well, but that was their Cinebrass and some of their other stuff, maybe percussion, Cineperk, Cinebrass, iron guitars. We have strings and piano, other guitars, your choirs. Tina Guo is another library that I am very interested in. Your Cinebrass Pro, CineWinds. So they are very much an orchestral, cinematic sample library developer, which is honestly great. Their Cinebrass is going to be pretty standard in the industry. So I think it is pretty great that they're offering core, solo, runs, 2 choir libraries, and CinePiano. All of this 50% off only in July. Now, the question is this right for you? I think you have to really look at your own sample libraries that you already own and ask yourself, is this what I am missing? Is this something that I could benefit from now or in the future? Like, don't go and buy choir libraries because you think it's on sale, so I'm gonna write a ton of choir music. Think about what kind of music are you writing? Are you maybe scoring something that needs the voices of war? if that's the case, by all means, you know, think about it and maybe go for it. For the longest time, I was missing solo instruments. So at the time of purchase, I bought solo CineStrings and got 5 different solo instruments in this one library. It's very common to get maybe a violin solo instrument, maybe a cello, but it offered all 5 instruments, which is what I loved about it. CinePiano was my first piano library that I looked into and really got. What drew me to it was the different velocity layers or the dynamic ranges, and the fact that I can adjust the CinePiano preset. That's already ready to go for me to mess around with. But then there was the classical piano, the cinematic piano, and the rock studio grand, all with 3 different characteristics. So that was what I needed because I didn't have that piano library. Looking at CineStrings Core for 50% off, a $500 library down to $250, I'm very tempted to just buy it, but string libraries are what I have a lot of. I have different companies, different variations. I have strings. So just because it's 50% off, and that's super tempting, do I need it? No, I probably don't, so I won't go for it. If there's ever a future sale like this, maybe down the line, I'll get it, but right now I know I don't need another string library, so I'm not gonna go for it. In terms of the runs, that is now $75. So by the end of July, I might actually get that because I don't have a decent run library, decent runs in my pretty much arsenal of samples. And then the Voices of War and Epic Choirs, I don't need right now. I don't typically write with a lot of choirs, and I did just buy the East-West Hollywood choirs. So for me, that's not something that I really need at the moment. But let me know if you did take advantage of this July CineSamples sale. Which one do you have? Which ones are you looking to get? And if you are interested in learning about some other products or just some music tips in general, then definitely check out some of my other videos. And as always, happy composing.